Today we will have our student report on Stravinsky. We'll also study about Schoenberg and Shostakovich. So our music today is going to sound a little different than what we've been studying thus far. We have the World War I and World War II eras coming around, and there was a lot of destruction and doom going around the world, and so the composers express this in their music. So don't be surprised if you hear some really weird music today.
Neoclassicism lasted between 1920 and 1950. Music during this time was marked by emotional restraint, balance, and clarity. And they were no longer writing programmatic music. They couldn't afford large enough groups to play programmatic music because of World War I. The post-World War I economy could not support the large orchestras, so more music was written for chamber groups. We will now have our student report on Igor Stravinsky. He was born in 1882 and died in 1971. So be sure you click on the student report on Stravinsky. Here are some Stravinsky tidbits that I thought were most interesting about his life. First of all, he studied piano, became quite good at piano, and he studied composition as a boy, but most of his teachers were unimpressed by his abilities. But one day, the director of the Russian ballet, who promoted music in the area, discovered him and thought he had a lot of possibility, commissioned him to write some music, and he became famous pretty much overnight. This Russian ballet director had a lot of clout, and people came to hear his music, Stravinsky's music, and everyone really seemed to like it, and he became very famous. Because of all the wars, Stravinsky had to move a lot. He was born in Russia, but during World War I, he had to move to Switzerland, and then later to France. And then finally, because of World War II, he had to move to the United States. And so he kept having to move from place to place. At the very end of his life, he was able to get back to Russia because he had missed his homeland, but he was displaced a lot because of the wars. And he actually disowned Russia for a while until he finally went back and saying that he missed his country. Most of Stravinsky's music was well accepted at their premieres. However, at the premiere of The Rite of Spring, which was a ballet, a riot broke out as the audience booed and hissed and were beating on themselves. They thought the music was too harshly dissonant, too percussive, and had too many pounding rhythms. Now later it became successful, and it is now thought of to be a masterpiece. But at its premiere, a riot actually broke out, so I think that's quite interesting. Speaking of The Rite of Spring by Stravinsky, we're going to listen to the first movement. Now, this piece is expressing primitivism, and it was originally a ballet. It is representing a solemn pagan rite. There are wise elders seated in a circle watching a young girl dance herself to death, and they were sacrificing her to propitiate the god of spring. And so it is looking back at early paganism and primitivism and putting it to music. You can read about the Rite of Spring starting on page 392. And then the listening guide to the movement that we're going to study can be found on page 395 to 396. And this is the introduction to part 1. The video we will watch is actually out of Fantasia. And they are showing video of like the beginnings of Earth and the volcanoes erupting and the dinosaurs running around everywhere. And so it's all just very primitive looking and very primitive sounding with lots of beating rhythms. Click on the YouTube link to watch this video. Expressionism in music is music that is written in social protest. They see a wrong in the world and they want to right it. And so the way they want to correct this and get their message out to the people is through their music. A modern day example of expressionistic music would be Radioactive. It's a piece written about the destruction of pollution and war on the earth, and how that we are creating a mess that we're going to have to live with. And they are wanting to get that message out to say we must stop pollution, we must stop wars, because we're going to destroy the earth. We will listen to some other pieces later on that are truly expressionistic in the time frame that we're talking about, the earlier 1900s, and that they are really difficult to listen to because they have so much dissonance and so much grotesque, distorted sounds that it will be difficult to listen to. But Radioactive gives you an idea of what expressionistic music was trying to do. They were trying to right wrongs that they saw in society. Click on the YouTube link to watch the Pentatonics and Lindsey Stirling perform Radioactive. Arnold Schoenberg was one of those composers who wrote the more difficult to listen to expressionistic music during the early 1900s. Schoenberg was born in 1874 and he died in 1951. And he's another composer who had to flee his homeland because of World War II. He was born in Vienna, Austria, and he died in Los Angeles, California. He was almost entirely a self-taught musician, and he studied violin at age 8, and he began composing soon thereafter. And where he primarily taught himself how to compose was by studying musical scores, performing in chamber ensembles, and going to concerts. This is kind of similar to Bach that we studied in the Baroque era, where he would take his brother's musical scores and copy them, and that's how he learned how to compose. Well, Schoenberg was similar. He studied compositions, performed, went to concerts, and learned how to compose that way, rather than taking from or studying from another composer. His father died when he was 16, and he had to get a job as a bank clerk to help support his family. When he turned 21, he lost his job at the bank, so he decided to give a try composing for a living. His music sounded very angry and often crazy, and he abandoned traditional tonality and he introduced atonality. Atonality is the absence of a key or tonal center, which makes it very difficult to listen to. It's hard on the ears. He taught music at the Prussian Academy of Arts in Berlin, but when the Nazis came into power, he lost his job. So he moved to the United States, where he took a position at the University of California in Los Angeles. He is a composer who introduced Sprechstimme, which is half speaking and half singing, and it's very weird sounding. We'll listen to one of his pieces that has this in it, but it's just really odd, half singing, half speaking, and so that's called Sprechstimme. He also invented the 12-tone system, which used tone rows, where all 12 tones of the scale were kept in a specific order. And you can read about this on page 402 to 403. It's quite confusing. You have your original tone row. You can do it in retrograde, which is backwards. You can do it in inversion, which is upside down. You can do it in retrograde inversion, which is backwards and upside down. So, but you have to keep these 12 tones in the same order. So it's really quite odd. But you can read more about it on those 2 pages. Schoenberg's music was so odd and so different that there were many musical critics who said he belonged in the insane asylum. And so we will hear some of his music, and you may agree that he belonged in the insane asylum. But again, some of his music is really difficult to listen to. One of the reasons I believe that some of the composers wrote music that sounded so strange and so angry and so dissonant is because of all of the madness and death that was going on with the world wars. You can see pictures that they were seeing that were happening during their lifetime of children and women in concentration camps, and men dying on the battlefield fighting for the freedom of these people who were being imprisoned, and for the people who were being oppressed and who were being killed in these horrible ways. And so this was just permeating the news and permeating their life, and it created much dissonance and difficulty in their own lives, and they expressed it in their music. So here we are at two of the pieces that I find the most difficult to listen to. But they're interesting examples of this expressionism. Piero Lunaire is written by Schoenberg. Piero is a tragic clown puppet that represents a poet who is drunk on moonlight and goes insane. He has nightmares filled with death and martyrdom. So these are the words that you will hear. The wine that with eyes is drunk, at night the moon pours down in waves, and a spring flood overflows the silent horizon. Desires shuddering and sweet swim countlessly through the floods. The wine that with eyes is drunk at night, the moon pours down in waves. The poet whom devotion inspires, made drunk by the sacred drink, toward heaven he turns, his entranced head, and reeling, sucks and slurps the wine with his eyes is drunk. And so there is a lady singing this. It's using the Sprechstimme, which is speaking and singing on pitch, and it just sounds a little crazy, so be ready for it. The second difficult piece that we're going to listen to today is called The Survivor from Warsaw by Schoenberg. It is a dramatic cantata based on a direct report by one of the few survivors of the Warsaw Ghetto. You will find the listening guide on page 407 and 408. And the reason it's so difficult to listen to is it gives you such a graphic description of what was going on in the concentration camps. Here are some of the lyrics that you will read on page 407. I cannot remember everything. I must have been unconscious most of the time. I remember only the grandiose moment when they all started to sing, as if prearranged, the old prayer they had neglected for so many years, the forgotten creed. But I have no recollection how I got underground to live in the sewers of Warsaw so long a time. The day began as usual, reveille when it was still dark. Get out whether you slept or whether worries kept you awake the whole night. You had been separated from your children, from your wife, from your parents. You don't know what happened to them. How could you sleep? They shouted again, Get out! The sergeant will be furious. They came out, some very slow. The old ones, the sick men, some with nervous agility. They fear the sergeant. They hurry as much as they can, in vain. Much too much noise, much too much commotion, and not fast enough. The sergeant and his subordinates hit everyone, young or old, strong or sick, guilty or innocent. It was painful to hear the groaning and moaning. I heard it, though I had been hit very hard, so hard I could not help from falling down. We all on the ground, who could not stand up, were beaten over the head. I must have been unconscious. The next thing I knew was the soldiers saying, They are all dead, whereupon the sergeant ordered to do away with us. So as you listen to this piece, you will feel the anguish of the person who is in the concentration camp through this music. You'll actually need to click on the YouTube link for this recording because it has restricted access for adults only. We are now going to skip ahead in your textbook to page 421, where we will study about Dmitri Shostakovich. He was born in 1906 and he died in 1975. Shostakovich lived in Russia during the time of Stalin, and Stalin used terror, labor camps, and mass murder to promote his agenda. Shostakovich began studying music at the Petrograd Conservatory when he was only 13 years old, so that was quite young to be a conservatory student. But when he was 16, his father died, So he helped support his mother and sisters by playing the piano for silent movies. During Shostakovich's time in Russia, composers were forced to write music that sounded heroic, bright, and beautiful to show to the world that all was well in Russia. Therefore, Shostakovich fell in and out of favor with the communist government and went through numerous teaching posts. He would be hired when in favor and then fired when not in favor. If you composed music that the government did not like, you were blacklisted, or worse, you disappeared, never to be seen alive again. Shostakovich actually wrote a piece that represented the knock, knock, knock of the KGB at your door, coming to take you away. It's his string quartet number 8. We will be listening to the 4th movement first, because that is the movement where you can really hear the knock, 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 knock of the KGB coming to your door. And it's disguised vaguely as music, but it's definitely there. And in the 2nd movement, you can hear what sounds like a struggle. Either the person who is coming to be taken away is running away, or he is struggling because he's been captured and he's trying to get away. And so you can hear this in the music of this string quartet. A second piece that we're going to listen to by Shostakovich is his Symphony number 5. And you can follow along with this. We're going to listen to the 2nd movement. And you'll hear what is now going to become sort of a new shift in orchestral music during the 20th century. There are more solos, there's a lot more percussion, there's more brass, and the strings often do not get the melody. So this is a new trend that will move forward into the 20th century following this same example. I wanted to conclude today's session with a beautiful yet very sad sounding piece written by John Williams for the movie Schindler's List, which is a movie about World War II and the concentration camps and the persecution and murdering of Jews. And so I hope you enjoy listening to this piece. It sounds so sorrowful, but yet it is absolutely beautiful.
Be sure to read in your textbook page 389 to 408 and also page 421 to 424. And I hope you will see how these composers were expressing the horrors of war through their music.